So, Daniel Bryan. People are still talking about Daniel Bryan. What is going on with him at the moment? The latest, of course, that we know is that he's not currently under contract with WWE. We know that for a fact. His contract has reportedly expired or was set to expire last Friday. Not a lot of people, well, no, I say not a lot of people, nobody right now knows the official status of what is going on with Daniel Bryan, his contractual situation with WWE. It's really up in the air right now, but we do have some latest notes and tidbits when it comes to the future of the former WWE World Heavyweight Champion in the company, and possibly if he's going to be going somewhere else. Now, this is a really interesting story because usually if a former WWE superstar, if their contract expires, WWE tends to have a hard and fast rule of they don't like to mention that person's name on WWE television. They did it in the past, of course, of CM Punk. His situation obviously is very different to Daniel Bryan, but a lot of the time when it comes to, say, Chris Jericho, when he left WWE, he signed with AEW. He was essentially erased from WWE television. He was removed from the cold open, and it's happened with a lot of people when they go to another company or their contract expires. WWE then suddenly forgets that they exist. Well, it doesn't look like this is going to be the case when it comes to Daniel Bryan, and it looks to be something similar to how it was with Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar's WWE contract expired after WrestleMania 36 Night 2 in 2020, and on the odd occasion, WWE still mentions Brock Lesnar on television today. Now, that to me, and to a lot of people, indicates that they think that Brock Lesnar is set to return at some point to WWE. As far as we're aware, and as far as I'm aware, I certainly haven't seen any stories out there saying that Lesnar is going to return to WWE television anytime soon. But the general expectation is that at some point, when Brock Lesnar feels like it, when WWE finally cough up enough money, when fans return full-time into the arenas, when the effects of the pandemic start to subside even more than they are now, eventually the former Universal Champion Brock Lesnar will return to WWE. That's the thought process, at least. And it looks like that might be a similar situation when it comes to Daniel Bryan, because WWE reportedly has no new rule against its talent mentioning Daniel Bryan by name on WWE programming. This is according to a report by PW Insider. Now, of course, Daniel Bryan lost to WWE Universal Champion Roman Reigns 2 weeks ago in the main event of Friday Night SmackDown, forcing him to leave the blue brand on Fox. Now, Bryan's WWE contract reportedly expired that night, and he is still now contemplating what his next move will be in the world of professional wrestling. Now, reports have since come out saying that WWE is reportedly, quote, pushing hard to get him re-signed to a new contract. Daniel Bryan himself has remained radio silent about the whole matter. He's still very quiet and very silent as to what his next move is going to be. He's yet to publicly comment since losing the match against Roman Reigns, since his contract expired from WWE. WWE, of course, has quietly moved him to the alumni section of the website. That's not really a big deal. That could just be focusing in on the storyline. His contract has expired, so I guess people will read into that more than I think is necessary, to be honest. But his profile has moved to the alumni section of the website. Now, the report also noted that if WWE was truly looking to distance themselves from Daniel Bryan, they are not actively doing so. WWE's handling of Daniel Bryan, as I mentioned, is in stark contrast to someone like CM Punk and rules against mentioning his name on air. In fact, the WWE talent and employees and on-screen talent themselves have already been speculating as to what Daniel Bryan's going to do next on their podcast this week, because on this week's edition of After the Bow, Corey Graves and Vic Joseph, both WWE on-screen announcers, gave their thoughts on what Daniel Bryan's next move could be. This is what Corey Graves had to say, quote, "At this point, Daniel Bryan is playing his cards close to the vest to my knowledge. He hasn't made any public statements about what's next. There are plenty of speculation swirling in the internet wrestling community. That's basically all we have to work with at this point." Now, in interviews, of course, over the past month, Daniel Bryan has said he's looking to move away from wrestling full-time so that he can spend more time at home with his family. Bryan has even expressed interest in trying to work for WWE, but also, this is important, but also possibly wrestling in outsider promotions outside of the WWE universe. Now, when it comes to the Corey Graves quote there, when it comes to Corey Graves and Vic Joseph speculating what's going to happen with Daniel Bryan in the future, I know some people would look at that and say, see, it's all a work. It's all a work. They're trying to work us. They wouldn't be mentioning his name on WWE television if it wasn't a work. And I know some people saw SmackDown on Friday and said the same thing. See, they had the 10-bow salute by Roman Reigns, Paul Heyman, and Jey Uso to start the show, and that's an indicator that this is all a work. Daniel Bryan is going to come back. I don't necessarily believe that kind of thing. I think the after the bell stuff with Corey Graves and Vic Joseph, to be honest, I find that in a very similar vein to Bite This. That was WWE's internet show in the 2000s that they used to have on their website, and they know their audience, essentially. They know that for After the Bell, that a lot of people listening to that podcast will be certainly smarter WWE fans and people that pay more attention to the insider information and to the behind-the-scenes stories in WWE, and I think they're catering to their audience there. I don't see, just because Vic Joseph and Corey Graves mentioned it on After the Bow, see, it's all a work. I don't subscribe to that. I think when it comes to Paul Heyman, Roman Reigns, and Jey Uso on SmackDown doing the 10-bow salutes, again, I don't read into that as WWE saying, see, we're trying to keep his name out there because he's going to return. I see it as it's logical storytelling. If you had Roman Reigns, Paul Heyman, and Jey Uso come out this week and just not mention Daniel Bryan at all, that would feel really odd. The viewer at home would be saying, well, the whole big thing, you built up your show last week, was this big main event, and having Daniel Bryan be banned, banished, whatever word you want to call it, from Friday Night SmackDown. If you didn't address it, people would say, well, why are you not addressing it? That would be weirder. That would be bringing more attention to it instead of saying it. So I don't subscribe to that. You have to remember as well, and this is just a good example, I think, of this, is when CM Punk defeated Jeff Hardy in 2009, and Jeff Hardy was banned from WWE. Loser leaves WWE, and he ended up going to TNA at the start of 2010, the following year. Obviously, he had his legal troubles only a couple of months later as well. But the following week on SmackDown, what did they do after CM Punk defeated Jeff Hardy? CM Punk came out to Jeff Hardy's entrance music dressed as Jeff Hardy to get heat, because like with the Daniel Bryan situation, if you don't address it, there is just a massive gap in logic of not addressing it. So we'll have to wait and see. Personally, my opinion is they'll continue to mention Daniel Bryan's name because I think it's a similar case to a Brock Lesnar. Until they sign somewhere else, until Daniel Bryan shows up on AEW television or New Japan Pro Wrestling television or a New Japan Pro Wrestling event, which I don't think he will. I'm still leaning towards he'll re-sign with WWE, just his deal will be different. It will be somehow less dates or something like that. I'm still leaning towards that. But until Daniel Bryan does show up for another company, I think they keep mentioning his name because the hope is that he will come back and he will re-sign. And that was kind of the case with WWE for a lot of names. It was the case for, say, WWE with Chris Jericho. They didn't mind mentioning Chris Jericho by name. Even when he was with New Japan, he actually wrestled for WWE at the Greatest Royal Rumble until he said to Vince McMahon, I'm going to be doing another date with New Japan. And then Vince McMahon was a bit like, well, okay, whoa. So I think unless Daniel Bryan shows up for another promotion on another television program, realistically, WWE will keep mentioning his name. And I don't think it's worth looking too much into that kind of stuff. So that's the situation for Daniel Bryan when it comes to mentioning his name on air. Obviously, as I mentioned, it's a really big story. And Dave Meltzer has been talking about it a lot this week, especially, and I think that holds credence more from the AEW side of things because again, I'm not one of those people that when it comes to Dave Meltzer that I think everything he says is gospel. Far from it. I think a lot of people confuse Dave Meltzer's opinion with actual factual news or backstage information or insider scoops or whatever you want to call it. I think people confuse that a lot of the time. When it comes to AEW, Dave Meltzer does, of course, have an insider source, that being the All Elite Wrestling president himself, Tony Khan. So I do think we have to perk up our ears, if you will, when he starts talking about AEW because he does have some very good sources in there. If Dave Meltzer's reporting on AEW, it's coming from Tony Khan himself. So Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter this week said that Daniel Bryan could, quote, legally show up next week on All Elite Wrestling if he chooses. Now, I don't think he will. Obviously, the reason he can do this is because Daniel Bryan isn't subject to the typical 90-day non-compete clauses in the contracts of talent when they're just released by WWE. Daniel Bryan's contract has actually expired. He wasn't released, so he isn't under the same restriction. Now, Fightful Select, as I mentioned, reported this week that Daniel Bryan's contract expired after he lost to Roman Reigns, and that his contract at least was set to expire or has expired. So there is a lot of discussion, and I think when it comes to Meltzer, once again, Meltzer said that this week that Daniel Bryan would probably wrestle for New Japan Pro Wrestling at its next Tokyo Dome show, if not for the COVID-19 pandemic. But he also reported that, quote, the door is very much open for him to return to WWE. Fightful Select have also reported that those within AEW who they spoke to, quote, fully expect Daniel Bryan to re-sign with WWE. So, again, a lot of these different reports and sources are all kind of singing off the same hymn sheet, as it were. They're all realistically saying Daniel Bryan's contract has expired. They do expect him to re-sign with WWE. He could show up to AEW, and maybe he will use that opportunity to possibly go to AEW to leverage something with WWE and get the deal that he is looking for. My opinion really hasn't changed, I'm going to be honest, that much on it, and that's that I think Daniel Bryan will re-sign with WWE. I think there'll be opportunities for him to go to AEW. I wouldn't be surprised if AEW doesn't reach out, because that's what they've been doing, and I think AEW would be foolish and naive not to reach out, even if they think Daniel Bryan ultimately is going to re-sign with WWE and they think he's just going to use them as a leveraging tool to get a better deal with WWE, whatever. If they think there is even the most tiniest of fractions of possibility chance they could sign Daniel Bryan, they should reach out, because if they manage to pull it off, then it's a phenomenal deal. It's a phenomenal deal, and it's a phenomenal acquisition. So why wouldn't they reach out at the very least? Ultimately, I expect Daniel Bryan to re-sign, but it's something that's going to take time. I think something's going to take time. I don't expect Daniel Bryan to show up on Raw on Monday or NXT on Wednesday or anything like that. I think people that thought that maybe didn't really understand the gravity of the situation that much, but as I mentioned, this is a developing story, and the things with developing stories, they can change at any moment or any time. And of course, if and when it does change, or we have some new information, we'll talk about it here on the channel. Some other things I did want to talk about when it comes to the special throwback edition of SmackDown on Friday on Fox. Now, obviously, Jimmy Uso returned on this week's episode of SmackDown Throwback Special after being out with a knee injury since last year's WrestleMania event. Uso sustained his injury during a triple threat ladder match with Kofi Kingston and John Morrison on the grandest stage of them all in 2020. But Jimmy has been cleared for an in-ring action. This is according to PW Insider. So expect Jimmy to compete soon, possibly, I think, against Jey Uso at WrestleMania Backlash. We'll have to wait and see on that. Another bit of information from SmackDown on Friday. It was also reported that Aleister Black, as we've seen in the past few weeks, did initially have a vignette that was set to air on SmackDown on Fox this past week, but it was pulled at the last minute due to time constraints. WWE Hall of Famer Teddy Long also appeared on SmackDown to announce a stipulation for Cesaro and Seth Rollins' match. Cesaro went to win the match and is now set to face WWE Universal Champion Roman Reigns at WrestleMania Backlash for the Universal Championship on May 16. The report mentioned Long's appearance was just a one-off special for the show, but the roster loved having him at the show. Now, it was also reported on social media, I think a lot of people have probably seen this, Pat McAfee did an impersonation of Vince McMahon that didn't end up airing because of creative changes, this is according to Pat McAfee on social media, but the video was put out as a network exclusive. When it comes to SmackDown on Friday, and we'll talk about this in a second because I do want to talk about the overnight ratings when it comes to this throwback edition of SmackDown. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed SmackDown on Friday. It's a good show. SmackDown is, most weeks, for the most part, it's a reasonably enjoyable show. There are certainly holes you can pick in it, especially when it comes to the women's division, and that we were subject to a Reginald match involving female wrestlers. I really don't care for that at all. The biggest disappointment for me for SmackDown on Friday, the throwback edition of SmackDown, there was hardly anything throwback about it. If you weren't aware going into SmackDown on Friday it was a throwback edition, tuning in, you really wouldn't have had that much indication. Just because you changed the graphics, you don't change the Titantron, you don't change really any form of presentation about it. You change the graphics, you have Michael Cole in the outfit that they wore in the Attitude Era, and you have Pat McAfee doing kind of an impersonation of Vince McMahon, but not the full one, because they changed it, and you have Teddy Long show up. That doesn't make it a throwback edition of SmackDown. There was nothing throwback about it. And we are going to touch on this in the ratings, because I do think that people would have been a bit perturbed tuning into this and going, wait a minute, I thought we were going to get some cool throwback. And I know maybe the discussion on social media has been, the problem is with us fans of pro wrestling nowadays, is we get our expectations too high, or we get too excited, or we expect something, or we put something in our heads that we know isn't going to happen, or we think is going to happen, and then when it doesn't happen, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment, all that kind of stuff. But you've got WWE social media and WWE on Fox social media and WWE on BT Sports social media all week saying, which custom SmackDown set do you prefer? Do you prefer the Ovaltron or the SmackDown Fist, or which SmackDown intro do you like? All that kind of stuff. And then you tune in on Friday, barely anything was throwback about it. And the SmackDown Fist that everyone was hoping to see, I said it last week here on the video on the channel, I said that if we get the SmackDown Fist, it's an automatic win. Regardless of what they do creatively on that show, all I want to see is the SmackDown Fist. And WWE, they did a CGI SmackDown Fist and went, look, do you remember that? Look how great it was. CGI my ass. Nobody cares about CGI. And that's part of the problem now, is we don't want as much CGI. We don't want as much LEDs and all that kind of stuff. The moment that WWE went to those universal LED sets where you just have to change the graphics and suddenly we can switch to a Raw graphic, we can switch to a SmackDown set and all that kind of stuff. Nobody cares for that. You want to have your own identity. You want to have something that differentiates the show from the show on Monday nights and on Wednesday nights and all that kind of stuff. We wanted to have the custom set back. I want to have custom sets back for pay-per-views. That's why people like WrestleMania and the sets and that, because they look different. They feel different to what we're used to seeing on Monday and Friday nights. You know, you can't just switch something and go, suddenly, look, we're talking about SmackDown and it's the SmackDown Fist. It was just the biggest middle finger when they put up that CGI fist of, do you remember this? Well, we're not actually going to kind of give it to you. We're going to give it to you in graphic form. Oh, my word. It was so ridiculous. It was so ridiculous. Anyway, let's talk about the ratings and then we'll wrap it up here when it comes to the special throwback edition of SmackDown. Now, these are the overnight ratings. We won't have this confirmed until probably Monday. But SmackDown's Friday special throwback edition of SmackDown drew an average of 2.157 million viewers in the overnight ratings. This is according to Showbuzz Daily. It peaked, of course, at the second hour, drawing 2.166 million viewers, which you can see in the graphic there. So hour 1 drew 2.147 million viewers. Hour 2 went up to 2.166 million viewers. SmackDown also drew an average of a 0.6 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic, which was number 1 for the night, which of course is impressive. You got to hold WWE to the same standards as we had for AEW. Of course, AEW was number 1 for the night on cable on Wednesday. SmackDown was number 1 in the 18 to 49 demographic for Friday. If the number does hold up, it would be up 6.9% in viewership from last Friday's SmackDown, which drew an average of 2.018 million viewers with a 0.49 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. Again, when it comes to ratings, I know I always say this when it comes to ratings, and then people would say, well, why are you talking about them then? Ratings are obviously, they do have an importance to this day. They don't have as much importance as they did in the 1990s. They're not the be-all and end-all of success in the world of pro wrestling. But they do tell a story. They do tell, obviously, people that are tuning in live to the television networks and to the advertisers. Obviously, they're very important as well. SmackDown being number 1 for the night on is obviously, they're going to be very, very happy with that. My only concern would be, if I was SmackDown, or if I was WWE rather, or if I was Fox, would be that we promised the throwback SmackDown. And to be honest, I'm surprised that they actually went up in the second hour, because that implies that people either tuned in late or liked what they were seeing enough that they were talking about it on social media, and then people tuned in. I don't know. I just can't believe that you would tune in expecting to see this real cool throwback retro edition of SmackDown and then just saw nothing different to what you would have seen the prior week on SmackDown. I'm surprised we didn't see a drop-off, because myself, I was disappointed. Not that it was a bad episode of SmackDown, but you did feel a bit of a letdown. And maybe those people that are on social media that are criticizing people for getting their hopes up too high, or for getting expecting too much when they're not going to get it, maybe they're right. And maybe we should not have our expectations too high. I don't know. I just thought that as a throwback edition of SmackDown, they could have done far more retro stuff. I enjoyed the old school Raws that they did in, say, 2010 and 2013, when they actually changed it back to the custom Raw set and they really tried to do something a bit retro and a bit old school. It just didn't feel throwback for me. It didn't. And again, maybe my expectations are too high, but for me, just changing the graphics or putting an old intro in it, I mean, this is what we'll finish up in. They opened the show with talking about the throwback edition of SmackDown, and the reason they did it is because Fox was doing a throwback thing this week. That was the reason they did it. And the first thing pretty much they show, after Michael Cole and Pat McAfee do their on-camera stuff, is they throw to the first ever main event of the first ever proper episode of SmackDown, which was Triple H versus The Rock from 1999. And as soon as you saw it, I don't know about you, as soon as they started showing The Rock and Triple H from 99 for the WWE Championship with Shawn Michaels as the referee, I was watching it going, honestly, if you were a viewer, you'd be like, right, I'm going to tune into this and I'm going to tune out, because it's not going to get as good as what I've just seen. Even if it's a recap package, I'm going to be watching this. And WWE almost needs to be careful when they do this, because they're putting up a side-by-side comparison, essentially. They're putting up a side-by-side comparison whereby you look at it and you go, wait a minute, that was amazing in 99. This is terrible today. This is nowhere near as good. So I don't know. I thought that was humorous. Nevertheless, as always, guys, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the news about Daniel Bryan when it comes to his contract, mentioning him on WWE television, some notes behind SmackDown's Throwback Edition on Friday, and the ratings, the overnight ratings for SmackDown's Throwback Edition on Fox this week. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, get the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.